Hello and namaste to all of you. Today in our UPSC GS series, we are doing under sustainable development the forms of industrialization. It is the unit 4 of the sustainable unit 6 of the sustainable development and point 4 of the unit 6. Unit 6 is patterns of the industrialization and its point 4 is forms of industrialization. This is audio number 10 and general instructions for the student is same that they have to listen it carefully and note down 10 words from this audio number 10 by listening intentionally. Now we begin. Point 4. Forms of industrialization. Industrialization takes many forms and develops at different stages through time. However, with the mention of industry, people tend to conjure up classic images such as textile mills, shipbuilding, or heavy engineering. These were definitely the first areas to be industrialized. With time, the word industry in general now encompasses areas, many newer areas. Broadly, industries can be of the following types depending on the raw material used and products made. They are number 1, manufacturing industries. Industries which produce goods by utilizing or processing raw materials, semi-processed materials, byproducts or waste products or any other goods. Number 2, energy-based industries. Energy-based industries. Industries generating energy from water resources, wind, solar, coal, natural oil, gas, biogas, or any other sources. Number 3, agro and forest based industries. Business mainly based on agriculture or forest products such as integrated sericulture and silk production, horticulture and fruit processing, animal husbandry, dairy industry, poultry farming, fishery, tea gardening and processing, coffee farming and processing, herbiculture and herb processing, vegetable seed farming, mushroom, vegetable farming or vegetable processing, tissue culture, greenhouse, beekeeping, honey production, rubber farming, floriculture and production, and forestry related businesses such as leasehold forests, agroforestry, etc. Number 4, mineral industries. Industries that excavate or process minerals. Number 5, tourism industries. Tourist lodging, motel, hotel, restaurant, resort, agency, travel agency, skiing, skiing, gliding, water, rafting, cable car complex, pony trekking, hot air ballooning, parasailing, golf course, polo, horse riding, etc. Number 6, service industries, workshop, printing press, consultancy service, ginning and baling business, cine, cinematography, construction business, public transportation business, photography, hospital, nursing home, educational and training institution, laboratory air services, cold storage, etc. Number 7, construction industries, road, bridge, ropeway, railway, trolley, bus, tunnel, flying bridge, and industrial, commercial, and residential complex construction and operation. While establishing an industry, its optimum size is of utmost importance to reap the maximum benefits. One of the main advantages of an industry is employment generation. Depending on the size of the industry, capital input, employment generated, technology source, sophistication of technology involved, skill involvement, etc., industries are classified. The classification of industry into types is decided for a country by its government. Different set of rules, permit rules, policies, tax structure, etc. prevail for each category. One criteria of setting up an industry is the ratio of capital investment and persons employed. For an investment of every rupees 50,000, one person has to be employed. On the basis of the capital investment, industry is classified into cottage industries, small scale industries, large scale industries. A cottage industry is one which has investment of up to rupees 20 lakhs, small scale industries up to rupees 1 crore, and industries with investments above 1 crore fall under large scale industries. 4.1 Artisan, craft and cottage industries. This category of industries mainly uses traditional skills and is related with tradition, art and culture. These industries utilize specific skills and locally available raw materials. Examples of cottage industries include units producing agriculture and forest-based goods, nurseries and tree farms, value-added wood products, carvings and furnitures. Cottage industries also include small-scale production of textiles, hand-woven carpets, handicrafts, wood and metal, alcohol, household appliances, consumer durables, knitted wear, hosiery, jute products, livestock processing, etc. Tourism and recreational agencies such as outdoor guide services are also included in this category. Rural cottage industries. Rural cottage industries are small scale industries manufacturing, commercial and businesses units that operate in rural areas and are set up in a dwelling or on the property where the residence is situated. Such units are primarily dependent on local resources and raw materials and cater to regional and local markets. The development of cottage industries is essential for growth with equality and economic justice for all citizens. It is an informal sector and the products from home-based production and cottage industries need to achieve high growth with sound policy and institutional support. The contribution of these sectors to any economy cannot be ignored. This is especially true for countries of the SAARC region as they are important sources of employment and income for many families. In India, they have 40% share in the total industrial output, 35% in exports, and over 80% in employment. These ventures, in spite of being based in rural or small areas, through proper marketing can attract export market tremendously due to their traditional and ethnic nature and use of natural resources which do not degrade the environment. The employment opportunities in individual units are meager and are mainly catered to by small groups or within the family. However, clusters of such groups are now linked through government or non-governmental organizations to the market, thus spreading their industrial nature. 4.2 Small scale industries. Small scale industries are manufacturing units mainly making accessories for large scale industries using mostly indigenous technology. They are usually situated in the vicinity of large scale industries. However, many small scale industrial units are not doing well in this era of globalization and economic liberalization. In order to avail opportunities of globalization and economic liberalization, the associated entrepreneurs need institutional support for technology upgradation, infrastructure support for market penetration, and adequate working capital finance from the banking sector. There is an urgent need to look into policies and programs to improve their competitive strength with a long term outlook. There is also a need for small entrepreneurs to keep pace with the structural and technological changes taking place in large industries. Examples of small scale industries are soap, furniture, shoes, food processing units, textiles, light industries, construction units, vehicle parts, automobile parts, etc. 4.3 Large scale industries. In India, industries with a fixed asset of more than 100 million rupees are called large scale industries. These could be manufacturing units or others which use both indigenous and imported technologies. They cater to both the local and foreign markets. Examples of large scale industries include fertilizer, cement, natural gas, coal, metal extraction, metal processing, petroleum, natural gas, mining, electrical, petrochemical, food processing units, tourism, banking, sugar, construction, automobile, communication equipment, cement, chemicals, earth movers, consumer durables like television, refrigerators, etc., engineering products, vehicle assembly, beverages, beverages, gas and water, other fuels, agricultural processing, insurance, and finance. With the opening up of the market and globalization, the effects on such industries has been mixed. Some have gained by attracting foreign customers, foreign trade and technology tie-ups, while others have lost out due to their inability to cope up with the open market competition. Point 5 Impact of globalization. Globalization refers to the rising levels of economic interconnectivity in the world, increasing interdependence, the emergence of global markets, prices and production, and wider diffusion of technology and ideas. Three main components of globalization are: number one, growth of foreign direct investments (FDI) due to financial liberalization and relatively costless international financial transactions. Number two, growth of trade due to the emergence of global markets and the reduction of trade barriers. Number three, diffusion of global technology and innovations. 5.1 Foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investments (FDI) have been one of the defining features of the world economy and globalization over the past 20 years. It implies the creation of new enterprises abroad or the acquisition of substantial stakes in existing foreign enterprises. FDIs had grown at an unprecedented pace for the last 2 decades, with only a slight interruption during the recession in the early 1990s, largely due to increased liberalization brought about by reduced barriers to trade and investment and discriminatory subsidies. Today, some 60,000 parent companies of multinational enterprises worldwide worldwide have established over 500,000 affiliates in countries other than their own, with the amount of inward FDI stock values at roughly $4,000 billion. These foreign affiliates are estimated to have generated total gross output of $2,600 billion and a total employment of over 35 million in host countries. For 90% of all parent companies located in the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development (OECD) countries, a little more than half of all their foreign affiliates are in operation in non-OECD countries. Foreign affiliates are a source of industrial production and employment in a number of emerging and developing economies. Although foreign direct investment contributes to growth in the developing countries, the benefits are not equally shared. Although foreign-owned companies tend to pay wages in developing countries higher than and what the domestic companies pay, the skilled workers tend to gain more than unskilled workers. Thus, while FDI may improve economy in the aggregate, more attention should be focused on the distribution of gains from FDI, particularly effects on wage inequality. 5.2 Transnational corporations. Foreign direct investment (FDI) by transnational corporations (TNCs) and the transnational system of production and international economic transactions in now is now the most dominant element of the world economy, with TNCs increasingly influencing the size and nature of cross-border transactions, says a report of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, even CTAD, UNCTAD. The world's TNCs, 40,000 parent firms and 250,000 foreign affiliates account for two-thirds of the world trade in goods and services, one-third in intra-firm transactions, and the other one-third in inter-firm transactions. This means that in practice, only one-third of world trade in goods and services is free under the so-called free market, free trade theories of arm's length transactions. With the emergence of TNCs and their involvement in national economies, we are witnessing an unprecedented transfer of power from people and their governments to such global institutions whose primary allegiance in other nations is to their corporate entities and their profitability. The growing role of FDI in changing the pattern of industrialization and for linking national economies and improving economic forms of national economic development has to be taken its account in any sustainable development framework that provides for stability, predictability, and transparency at the multilateral level. Summary of the chapter. This unit discusses and beginning and patterns of industrialization, historical significance, and mapping since its inception in Britain in 1770. Owing to industrialization, Britain held the position of world economic leadership for over a century. Changes in industrial organization brought about growth and far-reaching impact. Other countries of Europe soon followed Britain. The process of industrialization influences a number of other areas like the economy and social condition of a country and of the world at large. With the with the positive effects of industrialization, there have been negative effects too, as observed by the degradation of the environment. The policy of the developed countries to deindustrialize by shifting their basis on the developing countries is seen as detrimental detrimental to the environment in those regions, although there will be short-term economic gains for the poor countries. The long-term sustainability of the culture of the local people will be eroded as they will follow the same path as the developed countries had done before. Industries are classified based on their technology, level of mechanization, scale of operation, skill requirement, capital investment, etc. These industries are set up based on the availability of the resources and skills. Accordingly, developing countries have a preponderance of cottage industries that use traditional knowledge and skills and the available natural resources. They are non-polluting and the products are eco-friendly. Therefore, the developing countries need to formulate policies based on the upgradation of their traditional systems and adopt less damaging forms of industrialization. The impact of globalization and opening up of transnational corporations spreading over the world and foreign direct investment has been seen on the economy and social conditions of the developing countries. Although foreign direct investment contributes to growth in the developing countries, the benefits are not equally shared. Skilled workers tend to gain more than unskilled workers. TNCs, TNCs and the transnational system of production and international economic transactions is now the most central factor of the world economy today. Keeping the growing importance of TNCs and FDI, an agenda needs to be prepared to provide stability, predictability, and transparency to the system. Now we will begin Unit 7 of the Sustainable Development Issues and Challenges. Unit 7 is Inequitable Growth. The structure of inequitable growth is point 1 Introduction, point 2 Indicators of Inequality, point 3 Development of Exclusion, point 4 Bridging the Gap. Under this bridging the gap, relationship with sustainability, state initiatives and community-led initiatives, and at the last, summary of the inequitable growth. Now we will begin point 1 Introduction of the inequitable growth. The eminent economist Simon Kuznets defined a country's economic growth as a long-term rise in capacity to supply increasingly diverse economic goods to its population. This growing capacity, based on advancing technology and institutional and ideological adjustments that it demands. Economic growth essentially involves three components, that is, capital accumulation, growth in population, and technological progress. The major foundations of economic growth are the investments that improve the quality of the existing physical and human resources and increase the quantity of resources. A few countries have attained high levels of economic growth, developed countries, while many others are still at fairly low levels of economic growth, and they are developing countries. At a global level, this inequity is often termed as an economic divide between the countries of industrialized or developed North and the developing South. The developed North is often blamed by the developing South for influencing the international institutions to orient their policies to favor the North. The challenge in the era of liberalization and globalization is to bridge this divide if sustainable development is to be achieved. This would involve cooperation between the countries of the North and North-South cooperation amongst the countries of the South-South cooperation, and development initiatives within the countries themselves. Several such initiatives have been taken. The developing countries are mostly rural economies with agriculture as their base and have not been much affected by modern industry and technology. Therefore, many of their practices do not suffer from the adverse environmental impacts that arise from polluting practices in industrialized economies. Such indigenous practices and experiential knowledge is also being recognized, and agriculture has been the major area of focus. At the grassroots level, the people's groups like the panchayats and the non-governmental organizations NGOs in many parts of India are working towards the upliftment of the socio-economic and environmental conditions of both the rural and urban areas. Point 2. Indicators of inequality. One of the principal failures of development economies of the developing nations in the 1950s and 1960s was their inability to adapt to their circumstances, the valuable experience of economic growth in the West. The reasons why the growth experiences of developed countries could not directly spread into the developing countries was due to the less favorable initial economic, social, and political conditions of these countries in the post war era. The significant differences that led to a divergence in the growth patterns seen in the two types of countries were due to the following factors. Number one, physical and human resource endowments. The developing countries are much more endowed with abundant natural resources than the developed nations, but they often lack the methods or technology for their exploitation, as seen in parts of Latin America and Africa where the natural resources are abundant. Only the powerful developed country joined the multinationals are engaged in large-scale utilization of resource. The difference in skilled human resource endowments is even more pronounced. The ability of a country to convert natural resources into higher value products depends on the skills of the labor force. The population in the developing countries is less educated, are less trained, and are inexperienced as compared to their counterparts in the developed nations. The technology gap between the two nations can be divided into two types: a physical object gap involving factories, roads, etc., and an idea gap that includes knowledge about marketing, distribution, inventory control, etc. No such gaps existed for the developed countries on the eve of expansion of their Industrialization. In these countries, industrialization was brought about by a long process of change. During the change process, the population of these countries adjusted to the social and political framework. On the other hand, in the developing countries, the institution of industrialization was introduced without the population getting adequate time and opportunities to absorb the related social and political change. Number two, relative levels of per capita income and gross national product GNP. The lower per capita income in the developing countries relative to that in the pre-industrialization phase of the developed countries was probably due to the lower productivity of agriculture and the lower supply of agricultural land per worker in the developing countries. This implies that in the pre-industrialization period, the ratio of per worker income in the agricultural sector to that of the non-agricultural sector in the new developed countries was not equal, as it was not of as large as in the late industrialization developing countries. At the beginning of the modern growth era, the developed countries were thus in an advantageous position with their relatively better financial position and could accelerate their economic growth to widen the income gaps between themselves and the developing countries. The developing countries began their industrialization from the lower end of the international per capita income scale. This weak position slowed down their economic growth. Number three, climatic differences. Majority of developing countries are situated in the tropical or subtropical climate zone, by the virtue of which they are rich in a variety of natural resources. It has been observed that the developed countries are primarily located in the temperate zone. Industrialization pattern and connected lifestyles under those climatic conditions, when imposed in the heat and humidity of developing countries, is likely to have contributed to deteriorating soil quality, rapid deterioration of goods, poor health of animals, weakening of health of workers, etc. This is seen as another reason why economic growth of developed countries has not spread in equal measure in the developing countries. Number four, population size, distribution and growth. Before and during their early growth years, the developed countries experienced a slow rise in the population growth. As industrialization proceeded, the death rate declined and the birth rate rose slowly, but as simultaneously incomes were rising. These countries did not experience natural population growth rates in excess of 2% per annum. By contrast, the population in the developing countries has been increasing at the rate of 2.2% per annum. This has also worsened the availability of agricultural land per capita in most developing countries, not only compared to what is presently available in most developed countries, but also compared to the pre-industrialization phase. Basically, the developing countries have a much higher person to land ratios than the presently developed countries in the early growth years. Number five, economic policy. Economic policies and measures influence the patterns, directions, and rates of growth by affecting investment structure as well as choices of technological progress. Significant differences between the economic policies of developed countries and developing countries need to be recognized. Thus, inward oriented trade policies give rise to output market that ultimately determine total factor productivity of chosen technology. In the Indian context, after independence, the government adopted the ideology of economic nationalism and self-reliance rather than forging connections with the global economy. A restricted growth of 1.5% per annum in gross domestic product (GDP) was achieved for 3 decades till 1980s. Apart from this, with incentives generated by the soft budget constraint in the public sector coupled with policies of industrial licensing resulted in building capabilities in non-competitive market structures. Constricted constricted flexibility in adjusting to the market signals and opportunities for rent-seeking behavior. The higher incremental capital output ratio restricted the overall economic growth rates. Although technological capability was built, the economic consequences of this policy that had since 1991 changed were: number first, focus remained on restricting imports rather than exports. Number two, insulation from international competition resulted in undermining competitiveness internationally. Number three, the technology gap between what prevailed in internationally competitive economies of the developed countries and what was present in India increased. A comparison some growth indicators between least developed countries (LDC), the European Union (EU), and the United States (US). Serial number 1. Indicators: total population LDC 673.9 million, EU 305.1 million, US 285.3 million. Number 2. Indicators: population growth annual percent LDC 2.2%, EU 0.5%, US 1.1%. Number 3. Indicators: life expectancy in years LDC 50.7, EU 78.2, US 77.5. Number 4. Indicator GDP current in dollar LDC 194.8 billion, EU 6.1 trillion, US 10.1 trillion. Number 5. Indicator value added in agriculture percent of GDP LDC 32.6, EU 2.3, US 1.6. Number 6. Value added in industry percent of GDP LDC 23.8, EU 29.2, US 24.9. Number 7th. Indicator fixed lines and mobile telephones LDC 11.9, EU 1252.3, US 1117.9 per 1000 people. Number 8. Indicators internet users LDC 1.5 million, EU 91.1 million, US 142.8 million. Percent of manufacture exports high technology exports percent of manufacture exports is the indicator. Number 9. LDC no, EU no, US 32.1. Last number 10. FDI net inflows in reporting country current in US dollar is the indicator. LDC 30.9 billion, EU 272.3 billion, US 130.8 billion. The type of resulting inequities as shown in the table 7.1, which gives a comparative account of some of the important indicators of growth from the developed country perspective. As can be observed from it, the least developing countries LDCs are characterized by high population density and growth, low life expectancy and GDP. The indicators of growth in the developed countries show high technology use and export and increasing foreign direct investment FDI. Now, point 7.3 we will discuss